If you'd like to minimize the webinar viewing panel, you can do so by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also click on the orange arrow to expand your webinar console. We encourage you to submit your questions via the webinar console throughout the webinar. On the right, we will save time at the end for a Q&A with the audience. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you via email within 48 hours. You can also find all of these materials posted on our website at cisa.org/webinars. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, my colleague, Anna Adamsson.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zareen. Next slide, please. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this webinar. I'm going to start off by introducing our organization, Clean Energy Group. We are a nonprofit based out of Vermont, but we work nationwide, and our staff is distributed nationwide. I'm based in Indiana, and Mari's in Philadelphia. This webinar is a presentation of the Resilient Power Project, which is one of our focus areas within the organization. Through that project, we have a couple different arms of work that we engage in, including policy work, as well as direct community engagement. And the topic of today's webinar, our Pre-Development Technical Assistance Fund grant program for community service providers. Next slide, please. So what is the Technical Assistance Fund? This program, like our organization, is nationwide. Folks from all 50 states, as well as DC and Puerto Rico, are eligible to apply for pre-development assistance so that they can learn more about solar and battery storage and how these technologies can integrate into their community resilience plan. Over the last 10 years, we provided over $1.5 million in funding to folks across the country, houses of worship, community centers, health clinics, affordable housing providers, and as you can see in this quote here, to a food bank in Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. The TAF supports, like I said, the development of clean energy projects through small grants ranging from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the scope of the project, the size. Most projects do tend to run in the $8,500 to $9,500 range. And these funds go directly to an engineer, a technical services provider, who will develop a techno-economic feasibility assessment for these folks. These engineers serve as trusted allies who can provide all that information that folks need to know up front about what solar and battery storage can look like for them. As a part of this program, we are proud to be able to help folks learn about solar and battery storage and build their capacity and knowledge on these technologies and then share it with their communities. Next slide, please. Over the last 10 years, like I said, we've granted over 1.7 million, that last slide was out of date at 1.6, across 32 states and territories, supporting over 150 community service partners and 309 community facilities. Some of our grants go to multiple facilities in one community. Over this time, over 60 projects have gotten completed and actually installed solar and battery storage, and that has supported over 3,000 affordable housing units. And now I'll pass it over to Seth for an awesome announcement.
Thank you, Anna. So on the next slide here, so I'm going to provide a little bit about the history of the TF, but I first wanted to share some news about the next evolution of our work in technical assistance. So Clean Energy Group, as of yesterday, we were pleased to announce that we were awarded funding through the EPA Solar for All program as a member of the Community Power Coalition, which is led by Inclusive Prosperity Capital. It's very exciting, and this is a multi-state initiative that is working with community-based solar developers, providing significant benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities. Clean Energy Group will be working on, again, energy resilience and pairing batteries with community solar for that community resilience and resilience hub. So we're very excited to be adding this into our technical assistance program and some of the next chapter of our work. But now let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk about the beginning of the Technical Assistance Fund. So as we're celebrating, we're in our 10th year of the Technical Assistance Fund. I've been with Clean Energy Group since we awarded our first Technical Assistance Award. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why we established the program as part of our Resilient Power project and where we got to today, the program that exists today. So the Resilient Power Project was established in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, and the impact of the outages across the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states, where we saw that low-income communities, historically marginalized communities, were impacted by the storm itself and the prolonged outages more than others. What we also saw was a wide-scale failure of traditional generators, mostly diesel generators, during the outages. So what we wanted to do through the Resilient Power Project was enable greater access to clean energy technologies for resilience, to have on-site generation, not be dependent on outside fuel supplies, and have something that provides value throughout the year, solar and energy storage for savings. So once we started this and looked at what was happening, we saw that there was a lot of interest after Sandy to, particularly among states, to invest in resilience projects and this next generation resilience projects, not just depending on traditional gas and diesel generators, but looking at solar and battery storage, which really batteries were just emerging at the time, but as a resilience backup power solution. Unfortunately, there was a bunch of money that went into this, but in order to apply for those funds, most of the groups had to already have a plan in place. They had to have their system already designed and be able to apply for the amount they needed to build solar and energy storage. Most groups, even groups that have a lot of experience, didn't have, they certainly be able to design a storage system. Very few folks did at that time. And very few of the groups that really needed it had the resources in order to be able to engage with the kind of engineering support that you needed in order to do a proper solar and storage design. So that's why we launched the Technical Assistance Program. We also saw some initiatives where there were technical providers that were engaged to do the analysis that did a poor job. They didn't have a lot of resources to do so, and they did a very poor job in doing those analyses. So in addition to that engineering support, we wanted to be able to provide that one-on-one support that a Clean Energy Group provides in-house. While we work with outside engineers, we work in-house to be the ones that are kind of acting as the advocate throughout the process from day one of what is solar and storage until you hand it off to a project developer. So we didn't want to be the engineers ourselves. We're like, there are already a lot of good, talented folks out there that are doing this. So I didn't want to develop the engineering capacity in-house. What we wanted to be, as I said, were the facilitators, where we really saw there was this disconnect between the technical experts and on the group on the ground, particularly community-based organizations and others that were looking to advance energy resilience. So we developed a team in-house that could be that facilitator approach. Those folks that are there as part of each of the conversations, making sure that the questions that community members have and community-based organizations have get to the technical experts and the information gets back so that everybody's on the same page and understands each other and that the needs of the groups on the ground are being met. Next slide. So in the initial days of the program, I was going to talk very quickly about some of the original projects that we worked on. We really focused a lot on affordable housing and working with municipalities. Those were partners we were already working with, plus the funding that we had for the program through foundation support. That was of particular interest to foundations that we were working with, particularly on the affordable housing side. That's remained a big focus of the work. You can see some of our original projects. The Hartley Nature Center was the first project that ever got built through the Technical Assistance Fund, and the Sterling Municipal Light Department, that's a municipal utility that is one of the biggest projects that's been done through the Resilient Power Project, and also another early stage. In addition to helping shepherd these projects along and providing that technical assistance in the early stage, we wanted to make sure that the program was enabling more and more groups across the country to do that. So that's why these are both case studies that you're seeing here. So we don't just do a project and let it go and move on to the next one. We try to get information out there about these projects through case studies, through shorter featured installations, and through amplifying the voices of the partners that have made these happen. We don't make these projects happen, we just help facilitate them happening. On the ground partners and champions on the grounds are the ones that make that happen. We want to make sure that they're at the forefront when we're talking about these projects and how they get done. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Marriele Mango, who's going to tell you more about our Technical Assistance Fund.
Great. Thanks, Seth. I'm going to spend a little time chatting about where we've kind of come in the past 10 years and how the program's been influenced and grown and evolved. Just 1 second while I get control of the slides to move forward. Great. So one thing I wanted to talk about that I think is important in terms of how we provide the Technical Assistance Fund that we do is determining program eligibility. The Technical Assistance Fund is very intentionally meant to be a low barrier to entry, right? You're supposed to be able to easily make this program an easily accessible program with not super stringent and time-consuming reporting requirements to ensure that the folks that really need to be served the most by technical assistance are actually able to access that technical assistance and don't have capacity restraints. So part of that is in determining program eligibility, right? So we didn't want to have the boundaries for this program aren't super severe. We define critical community service provider as really how each community defines service provider. So for the eligibility requirements for the Technical Assistance Fund, it focuses on that you're located in and or serving a marginalized population and that you want to continue to be able to provide those services in the event of a power outage, right? So how do we just define critical community service provider? Part of that is traditional. So municipalities, first responders, fire stations, police, different health centers, things like that, different kind of umbrella first responder type entities. But we also want to focus on really the communities that define community service provider themselves. And so this program has a broad variety of people that have been supported, from community centers to emergency shelters, cooling centers, institutions of faith, affordable housing. We've worked with we've done portable solar and storage systems for nonprofits and emergency responders so that they can use in the field. Really, how do you define community service provider, and how can we support them in becoming more resilient? From there, as Seth mentioned, our kind of the initial folks that were served by the Technical Assistance Fund were our immediate partners, so folks like affordable housing, municipalities. In order to make sure that this program is actually reaching a broad variety of participants, we really looked at how do you ensure that those that need the support are receiving it. So part of that is in program evaluation, which Anna is going to dive in a little bit more to the metrics of that later. But we realized early on that a subset of population just wasn't being served by the Technical Assistance Fund as much as it could have. Specifically, BIPOC-led organizations, Native nations, Indigenous peoples. The percentage of technical assistance being awarded to them was lower really than it should have been. So we focused outreach on talking to coalitions, grassroots organizations, hyper-local outreach, referrals to figure out who's working where and let them know that we're here. The purpose of the Technical Assistance Fund is to support people doing this work in their communities, and how do they know we exist so that we can make sure to offer that technical expertise to really get the projects done that they're already working on and just need that extra support to get there. An increasingly important part of that has been our engineering partners. So in the past, we really, for the first half of the program, worked with 1 or 2 engineering partners consistently. And now Anna will dive deeper into this, but we have a much larger variety of engineering partners, and many of them specifically serve BIPOC-led organizations, Native nations, and by working with them, we're able to actually promote the program to the folks that they work with to make sure that projects that are harder to get off the ground, that aren't receiving funding, have access to do technical assistance, because there's no requirements on our end that this project is definitely going to move forward. You have X, Y, and Z lined up. So ensuring equitable distribution of funds, establishing a goal. So what in 2020, Clean Energy Group really dove into the metrics and the statistics of who's being awarded technical assistance, how is the Technical Assistance Fund serving folks, where are projects being developed, where are they not. And pairing that with the research really indicated that we needed and wanted to establish a goal for the funds. Out of over $1 billion, 1.3% was awarded to communities of color, low-income communities, and tribal and indigenous groups, as indicated by Donors of Color Network. 11 million was awarded to environmental justice activities. So these are broad numbers. They're much larger than the Technical Assistance Fund, but it just goes to show that BIPOC-led organizations, Native nations, the folks that are serving these populations are just not accessing or being awarded the funding that is necessary to actually develop community-led, community operated, and community-supported resilient energy projects. So in recognizing that, part of the Technical Assistance Fund really was figuring out how do we want to set a baseline for ourselves to make sure that we're ensuring technical support is going where it needs to go, and that our outreach, coalition building, informational materials are being directed in that way to ensure that we actually meet our goal. So in 2020, we established a 50% goal of TAF awards to BIPOC-led organizations specifically. So the shift in effort there was we were recognizing that prior to 2020, about a quarter of the awards and funding were going to BIPOC-led organizations. And the program should be operating at half or more to ensure that we're reaching the folks that really need to be reached. And the majority of our BIPOC partners are community-based organizations, community-led organizations, a couple of affordable housing developers, but primarily community-based organizations. 2 years into establishing this goal, so in 2022, which is our last published impact report, although the 2023 one will be coming out shortly, we had 43% of funds. So still missing that 50% mark that went to supporting BIPOC-led organizations. That was across 11 states, Native nations, and indigenous communities, across 23 organizations, and over $200,000 in funding. So definitely the switch in outreach, the establishing the goal, it had an immediate impact, in terms of the progress that we were making. And then this year, in 2024, thus far, 75% of our awards have been awarded to BIPOC-led organizations to date this year for the 2024 year, and we'll continue to track throughout the next year and basically measuring how are we doing, where are we going, and how could we do better from here. So the last thing I wanted to touch upon was just how technical assistance could be, the program could be utilized to kind of support and create partnerships that develop their own technical assistance fund. So the Clean Energy Group's Technical Assistance Fund, we were working with Connecticut Green Bank to establish basically a more niche technical assistance fund to serve their needs, which was to really promote technical assistance for solar and storage feasibility out of multifamily affordable housing. This really, the focus here was Connecticut has amazing incentives for solar and battery storage, especially as it applies to affordable housing, and folks just didn't really know of that it existed. They didn't know where to start. There were capacity restraints in terms of figuring out where to go for this. A lot of the smaller community-based affordable housing developers that worked in like one specific city or one specific region had serious capacity limitations to even understanding how do I go about applying for this, what are the tax credits, what are the economics, all of which is the point of a technical assistance program. So working with Connecticut Green Bank on a larger effort with Connecticut Insurance Department, Operation Fuel, Yale, we established a technical assistance program that also had a health focus. So how do we best support medically vulnerable individuals living within these residences, and how can we really partner with multifamily affordable housing providers that work with folks that have higher electricity, have a higher risk of a medical emergency in the event of a power outage. So folks that have electricity dependent medical equipment, reliant on refrigeration for temperature regulated medication. Working with affordable housing providers, we really saw that almost all of them, even if it wasn't a specific senior facility or a specific assisted living facility, had residents that they knew of that had unique medical concerns. And we were able to develop a specialized rubric as part of the solar and storage feasibility assessment that really dove into how can solar and battery storage support the residents that you're building? Is that through a resilience hub? Is that through individual units having their own solar and storage system? Is it a red plug where everyone has access to one outlet in their apartment that they can use in the event of a power outage? And how would that help improve health outcomes in the event of a power outage? So that was has been a very niche, very interesting application of technical assistance in partnership with the Green Bank. They have the added benefit of, working in relation to a financing institution. Part of our technical assistance fund doesn't include here's some next steps for financing that you can engage in. Working with Connecticut Green Bank, there is that opportunity of actually being able to educate folks as to specific financing that's meant for them and passing them over to a partner who can dive in further, which has been extremely beneficial for our partners. So weatherization has been added. It's really been this tailored technical assistance approach that's built off of our foundation, so they didn't have to create it from scratch, and we were able to provide that one-on-one support, the expertise we needed, and it's been a really a great partnership to date. So with that, I will pass it back to my colleague Anna, who will dive in a little bit more into the nitty-gritties of the Technical Assistance Fund.
Thanks, Mari, and I'll preview a little bit too. We're going to be joined by Jill and Kate from the Washington Department of Commerce, and they're going to preview or really dig into how they developed their own Technical Assistance Fund program version of it for Washington State. So it's awesome that we were able to share this example from Connecticut, and then a little bit later you'll be hearing from Washington State. So again, like Mari said, digging into how we envision early stage technical assistance and some of the key tenets that we find most important when working with communities is making sure, like Mari said, low barrier to entry. A lot of these folks, or some of these folks, are capacity constrained. They're already working 40-hour weeks or more on their community-driven services. So engaging in solar and battery storage, that's an add-on to their existing workload. Trying to figure out the financing and next steps and everything, that's added to their existing workload. So trying to make sure that this program, that the funding, it's low barrier to entry to folks. Also understanding that folks come to us with a wide range of pre-existing knowledge in solar and battery storage. We have an intake survey that we have folks take, and on that we ask them to share how they perceive their existing knowledge of solar and battery storage, and you can see here that it's basically out in thirds. A third of folks who have little or no knowledge of solar and battery storage, a third of folks who say they have some, and then a third who are more experienced and have that pre-existing knowledge that they come from. So the Technical Assistance Fund, we try to meet folks where they're at, providing resources for folks who've never heard of battery storage before and how it can help folks achieve resilience, and then folks who are much more advanced and are already thinking about critical loads that they want to isolate and have be supported by battery storage. The next one I have in parentheses, and that one's because it's a optional thing. It's something that's a key tenet to how we run our program, but we understand that there's challenges to having a rolling application window. And I know in Jill and Kate's presentation, they'll be digging into some of the challenges of how they have been leading their rolling application window, but for us, we find that it's really helpful for community organizations, again, who are capacity constrained, to be able to come to the table when it makes the most sense for them and not wait for a 1 or 2 times a year application window to open and an application deadline that they have to potentially figure out with their existing workload. We want them to be able to apply when they have capacity to and when it makes the most sense. We are a little off in slides here. Perfect. And then that last bullet point Mari had already covered, but making sure we're prioritizing projects not only serving BIPOC communities, but also projects that are led by the communities that we want these programs to serve. So Seth and Mari pretty much already covered this, but we try to provide our technical assistance in that blue color-coded critical resource gap of project planning. Folks usually come to the table knowing why they want to pursue resilience and pursue solar plus storage, whether that is for resilience, for the environment and improving their operation sustainability, or the economics, trying to reduce their monthly electric bills. And then they come to us and come to the Technical Assistance Fund to learn about how battery storage and solar can serve them. So some of the key things that are included in our feasibility assessment are the system size, the kilowatt and kilowatt hour size of the solar and battery storage that would fit their facility, the cost both upfront for the system as well as over the lifetime of the system, about 20 years, what the maintenance would cost over that time, as well as what kind of savings that they can anticipate both through utility programs as well as the ever important investment tax credit. We also want to look at how it can provide resilience. So getting some figures of how many hours of resilience, what sort of loads can be backed up, as Mari was saying, with battery storage. And then also what's the environmental impact, because that can be a motivation as well for folks pursuing projects. And all of this information, it's built to be a resource toolkit of sorts for folks to then go forward, talk to their boards, get them on board with this plan to add solar and battery storage, to talk to funders, get grant funding, move forward towards project development. These are all the key pieces of the puzzle that they need to know and identify, usually before they can take that next step and secure funding and then eventually get a project installed. So the Technical Assistance Fund process, on the left-hand side, that's our onboarding process. As I said, folks that have to fill out a short intake form. Then they have an intro call with me and Clean Energy Group to talk more about the resilience goals, just get to know each other. Then we partner them with an engineer of their choice, which I'll dig into a little bit later. Once everyone feels comfortable and are ready to move forward, then the engineer will draft a scope of work, which will inform the agreement. The two main parties are us at CEG, since we're paying the engineer for their services, and the engineer is delivering the feasibility assessment as the work product in exchange for the funds. Once the agreement is signed, this is a general summary of sorts of what the timeline looks like, but each project will differ depending on what engineer they're working with, the complexity of the project, et cetera, et cetera. But the main two parts of it are the kickoff meeting at the very top, where we dig into resilient goals and what folks are really hoping to gain from the resilient power system if they're looking to keep their medications refrigerated, if it's really important that HVAC systems are covered because the summers can get really hot, or even the springs and falls, and if the power goes out, you want to be able to provide cooling services, really digging into these questions to make sure that what the engineer creates for the assessment is able to serve folks' needs. And then you'll skip down to week 7. That's when we have the report review meeting, and that's when the engineer, we meet virtually again, and the engineer walks through what they found out in the report. And I just want to highlight that we build in this feedback cycle after that, so that when the engineer gives them this draft assessment, folks are able to look it through on their own time, ask any questions, and even ask any clarifications, feedbacks, next steps, that sort of thing, and that will inform the final work product, that final report. So providing options, there's a couple different ways that we approach this. I'll actually skip down to the second bullet point because it's the easiest to explain. It's vendor agnostic. We want to make sure that our reports are not telling folks to approach that battery manufacturer and that solar array production facility. We want this information to be widely applicable to lots of different suppliers of these technologies, so that folks can really decide next steps and aren't already pigeonholed into one. Choose which engineer that you want to work with. Again, I'll dig into that in a moment. And then back up to that top bullet point, compare costs and benefits between different system sizes and designs. This is an example feasibility assessment report completed for one of our awardees. And I've highlighted a couple sections. That first line that says storage and is outlined in orange, that is the potential storage sizes for two what we call resilient power scenarios. We make sure that our assessments include a solar only option so that folks can see what solar looks like, what the costs and benefits of that is by itself, and then be able to compare it to two different resilient power scenarios with two different battery sizes. So you'll see the first one is 10 kilowatts and the second one is 60 kilowatts, so 6 times bigger. And then the kilowatt hours, there's an even bigger difference in what that covers. And you'll see the cost, similarly, a huge difference. It's doubling the cost, upfront capital costs of the entire solar and battery storage system. But when you look down to that bottom line, when it looks at resilience, you'll see that the bigger battery is able to support 100% of the critical load at that facility for 3 days, which is a a ginormous number, especially as this was one of our earlier assessments. Now the smaller battery, the smaller system size, it says NA because it can't meet 100% of critical load. Now there is a different slide that digs into what exactly it can back up, and that's helpful information, of course, to know. But just know that we provide 2 different resilient power scenarios so people can really see where that sweet spot is for them, how much costs they can take on as an organization, either through funding or whatever means they have, versus the benefit of resilience and how much backup power they can rely on. As I said, we're going to engineers next. So the engineer referral list, we have a list of engineers that we've worked with over the last 10 years and have great working relationships with. We have them on our referral list that we share with community service providers during that first intro call with them. If they don't already have an engineer that they are working with, they are happy to choose one from our referral list, and we can set up an intro call and make that introduction with them. Importantly, just like we want to work with projects that are BIPOC-led, we also want to work with engineers that are BIPOC-led as well as women-owned businesses. So just half of our referral list is MWBE-owned. Which is really great. We want to make sure that money is going, again, to the communities that we want to serve. So folks can either choose to work with an engineer from a referral list, or they can choose to work with a different engineer that they already have a pre-existing relationship with, or one that is local to them. Over the years, we've worked with plenty more than 15, but over the last couple years, we've worked with 15 additional local providers and onboarded them to the TAF program so that they could serve the communities that wanted to work with them. So giving folks the choice of who they want to work with is really important so that folks can feel comfortable throughout this process and then also get that local expertise. I'll share 2 examples. We have a project in Hawaii that decided to work with a Hawaii-based organization, a technical service provider, and that has been really valuable as, of course, when you're getting out of the contiguous U.S., the prices for things, you can try to use the quoting from the national labs and the price estimates that they give for projects, but it can be a totally different story out in Hawaii. So the technical service provider actually gets quotes from, I think it's 3 to 5 different providers of solar and battery storage in the state, and then uses that and finds the happy medium, and that informs the report. So again, that local expertise there. Up in Alaska, same thing. Prices can be wildly different up there than it is down here in the lower 48. So important that folks can work with local engineers when they want to. One more thing, I know that I moved on to the next slide, but engineers, most of our engineers are work nationwide, and folks do not need a local engineer to move forward. I'd say 90% plus of our projects do work with one of our national engineers. There's no site visit needed for our level of pre-development assessment, that the support that we give folks. So folks can work with someone working out of Colorado or Maryland or wherever, and they can work remotely and get the same work product. So evolution of data collection. As I had said earlier, we have an intake survey that is 20 questions long and an exit survey that is a little bit shorter. And I just give some examples here. I'm not going to go through them. Other sort of questions that we're asking folks just to learn about where they're coming from and what their priorities are when it comes to solar and battery storage. And then also what their experience has been like with the Technical Assistance Fund afterwards. There we go. We are exploring new statistics that we want to be able to report on. So a couple aggregated statistics that we find compelling and are building out our ability to report on are the amount of funding that we've invested in pre-development support and how much that has actually generated an outside capital to get these projects built. Since we are completely pre-development focused, our funds then provide folks with the information that they need to then be able to pursue that next step, which is funding. And I think this is a really compelling case. We've invested $130,000 over 32 projects, and that has been able to generate $18 million in capital that was used for implementation to actually get solar and battery storage installed. over the lifetime of our program. Similarly, we've been able to support feasibility assessments for projects that have gone on to install 6 megawatts of solar capacity and 4 megawatt hours of battery storage, and we have plenty more projects that are in the pipeline and yet to be installed. Another data area that we are looking at is how we are describing the communities that we serve. Of course, as we've been saying this whole time, what organizations are led by BIPOC organizations, also which facilities are located in Justice 40 communities, and lastly, we're exploring ways to look at the community's proximity to pollution, its energy burden, which is, of course, is important when you're looking at solar and battery storage, potentially bringing down that monthly electric bill cost, as well as the health disparities in those communities, how many folks have been diagnosed with asthma and diabetes, both of which can be hugely impacted by a power outage if your insulin needs to be refrigerated and you don't have a refrigerator that is able to keep it cool. So now you're out your medication. If you're asthmatic and the air quality is not so great and you need to go to a place that has a air filtration system that needs to be powered and the power is out, you know, being able to have a resilience hub that folks can go to. So all interesting things to look at, but our program, we are non-competitive. We don't base this, any of these statistics on whether folks get a grant. It's just information, interesting information for us to follow. So on our exit survey, we ask folks to rank the barriers that they anticipate their project will face. And as you can see, the finances, the cost of battery storage specifically is a huge barrier, and I'll leave it at that. We can dig into the other stats maybe more in the Q&A section. But as I said, a lot of projects have been able to navigate those barriers and moved on to getting their projects installed, 60 in total. All those dots are actually the communities that we've supported with technical assistance. This isn't completed projects, but then the pop-outs are completed projects. So a nonprofit transportation center in Denver, New Mexico, remote wildfire operations command center. Boston, there's a bunch of affordable housing complexes that have been able to install solar and battery storage. Puerto Rico, being able to support medical clinics as well as fire stations there. And DC, the first solar plus storage resilience center and an affordable housing complex, as well as more recently this year, ribbon cutting on the first resilience hub in DC. So targeted technical assistance does lead to more projects actually being able to get installed, just underlining that. And one quick case study. So I had mentioned DC, the first affordable housing complex to install solar and battery storage for a resilience hub is Maycroft Apartments. They were able to back up some of their critical loads like charging phones and medical devices, refrigeration for food and medication, as well as hallway and stairwell lighting are all supported by battery storage. You can see the cost there, and then that is actually, now that the systems are installed, folks can see on average about $40 less in their electricity bills because of this system. And with that, I'm going to, I believe, pass it back over to Mari to close us out once the slide advances.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
I wanted just to touch upon the Technical Assistance Fund as our focus today, as we're focusing on technical assistance for solar and storage development. But I wanted to give a shout out to another one of our programs. It's more focused on capacity building. It's the Resilient Power Leadership Initiative. This program focuses exclusively on less about individual project development and more about being able to provide some funding. Grants are around $10,000 to community-based organizations so that they're able to set aside and fund time for their own staff to work on an internal project that matters to them related to resilience. So we've done well over $200,000 in funding at this point to community-based organizations to work on their internal capacity. We've had folks that have used that money to dedicate time to building resilience programming, to working with partners on being able to do a community engagement and education around resilience for the community, to exploring community solar programs. There's a lot. It's meant to be broad. Again, low barrier to entry, low reporting requirements. It's for a year, and it's really had a great impact. There's a lot fewer of these grants, probably 2 to 4 a year versus our technical assistance fund, which has done, I think we did almost 40 last year. So smaller subset, but still a great project. Next slide, please. So this is the breakdown of that program, $10,000 per year, 2 to 3 awards per year. This is almost exclusively, I think 100% of our grants for the past couple of years have gone to BIPOC-led organizations. And really the goal here is to seed long-term community-led programs that further advance energy equity and environmental justice. Next slide, please. So thank you for listening to Clean Energy Group's overview. This is our first webinar in a series of educational materials that'll be presented between now and the end of the year, celebrating our 10 years of Technical Assistance Fund. So keep an eye out as we keep releasing blogs and webinars kind of with that umbrella of focus. And I'm going to pass it over to Anna to introduce the next round.
Perfect. And Zareen, could you bring up the panelists photos slide, please? And I'll start sharing their bios. The full bios will be in the handout section of the control panel. You can open that up and see the full bios. It'll also be posted on our website afterwards. But without further ado, the two folks from the Washington Department of Commerce, is Jill Eikenhorst. They are a solar program supervisor. And they oversee a portfolio of solar grant programs with over $100 million in funding for Department of Commerce. Jill has over a decade of experience in program management and 9 years of experience in clean energy and certificates in sustainable energy systems and grant writing. We also have with us today Kate Pedersen, Energy Resilience Specialist at the Washington Department of Commerce. They work within the Energy Resilience and Emergency Management Office within the Energy Division at the Washington State Department of Commerce. Kate holds a BA in Environmental Design, Architecture from the University of Colorado and a dual master's degree from the University of Washington in Urban Planning and Public Health. Awesome subject areas and so important for this discussion of resilience and how it can benefit folks and how it can be integrated in folks' resilient plans. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to those two and they can introduce us to their amazing technical assistance program they are running over there.
All right, thank you. And I will get us started here. We want to talk to you about how we built a statewide energy technical assistance program through our Solar Plus Storage for Resilient Communities program. Next slide. And so a little background on Commerce first. We're a state government agency. We strengthen communities through programs ranging from housing and homelessness to economic development. And the Energy Division in Commerce is our state energy office. Next slide. And within the Energy Division, we act as a catalyst to advance the transition to a clean and just energy future. We inform, we invest, and we influence. And invest has historically meant a lot of grant programs, and technical assistance is a little bit new for us. Next slide. First, I'll talk about why we created our technical assistance program and how, and then I'll pass it over to Kate, who will discuss results and the process. Next slide. So first, just imagine you work for a small town or a nonprofit organization and you hope to develop a clean energy project. This might be the process that you follow. You get the idea, you do some basic research and get decision maker buy-in on that. You may do a rough order of magnitude cost just to understand, is this even feasible for our organization? May discover that it's pretty expensive, more expensive than you realize, and look for funding sources. And then get into technical feasibility of the technology, will it work for your site, and initial design and cost estimates. And then finally get to construction phase with hiring contractors and overseeing construction, do operations and maintenance, and eventually after a long system life, decommissioning that system. And so historically, most of our grant programs have focused only on the construction part of the project, or those green boxes, and all the other steps have to be completed before a community actually applies. And particularly the technical feasibility design and cost estimates can be a big barrier. Next slide. So what we've heard from communities is that this is a major barrier. So just some examples, we did a survey recently where 38% of respondents said that they needed technical assistance to get to the next stage of their clean energy project. And we also did a listening session a few years ago for energy retrofits for public buildings program, and asked, what is your greatest barrier to apply for this program, which is focused on construction? And 13% of people said their greatest barrier was the cost of consulting and engineering pre-application, and another 15% said that gathering data to complete the application was the greatest barrier to apply. And this quote here is from that listening session is a great example of this. They said, we don't have a budget for consultant services for this, which is out of the knowledge realm of a lot of the staff here. So for us, the technical aspects of the application are the hardest part. And the result of this is that communities with fewer resources get left out of this grant process, and we end up continuing disinvestment in historically disinvested communities. So next slide. So when the governor's office approached us about creating a new program focused on solar plus storage, we requested that planning and pre-development work be included in that program. And so this is the Solar Plus Storage for Resilient Communities program. It focuses on solar and battery storage in community buildings with the goal of enhancing grid resiliency and providing backup power during outages for critical needs. And it includes the construction as well as planning and pre-development work. Next slide. Okay, so we have, when we developed the program, we decided to go beyond our traditional competitive grant opportunity with that planning and pre-development work. The first option is a competitive grant, and with this option, Commerce provides a grant to the community and they hire and pay a consultant and then get reimbursed by Commerce. So we have a grant agreement with the community, and the community will have a contract with their consultants. There's a limited window to apply for this, and there's also a wider range of planning and pre-development opportunities, such as community engagement or analyzing a portfolio of buildings for further study. And then the other option is our technical assistance program. And so in this option, Commerce has hired a consultant to complete feasibility studies for communities. So the community gets a feasibility study at no cost. We only have a contract with the consultant in this case. And that contract covers many different communities. So a lot fewer contracts overall. And this option has ongoing intake through a request form and or an intro meeting with staff that can happen at any time. And it only provides feasibility studies through the consultants and wraparound assistance from Commerce. Next slide, please. When we conceived of this technical assistance program, it seemed pretty challenging, really because it was kind of new for us. And so when I sat down to write this out for this presentation, it actually didn't seem so complicated, but I think that, don't underestimate that path breaking and doing something that's a little different than what your organization typically does. The first hurdle was really getting the funding authority to do this, which I personally didn't have much to do with, but my colleagues have over time really built the case for supporting planning and pre-development work, both internally and with elected officials. And so once we did get the funding and decided to do this technical assistance option, we developed an RFP to select consultants who would provide the feasibility studies and outreach services as well. And writing that was a little bit challenging. We looked for some additional models to inspire us. One that helped was the Oregon Department of Energy's Solar Development Assistance Incentive, which can include pre-development work for solar and storage, and that provided us some info for what we might include in the scope of work for feasibility studies. And then Clean Energy Group and CISA also advised us and helped us to develop the RFP and evaluate the proposals as well. And we ended up awarding contracts to 2 consultants with different approaches. They are both based in Washington. We did get some national companies as well and ended up working with the ones that are based in Washington. The RFP included a total of $800,000 over 14 months, but that amount was not split evenly because of fiscal year stuff. And so the first half came in the first 2 months, May through June 2023, before our fiscal year ended on June 30th. So we didn't quite spend all of that first $400,000, but our consultant did make a valiant effort on that and spent quite a bit of it. So in all, a little less than $800,000 is getting us about 50 feasibility studies, and that does depend somewhat on the complexity of those, and we still have some to be completed. It also included some additional services for community outreach assistance and some grant writing help, not full grant writing services, but some help, kind of phone a friend type help for grant writing. And then additionally, talking about resources, we had about 1.5 FTEs dedicated to this program. So one of those is Kate, and she's going to talk all about what she does for this program, which is really essential. And then another half of an FTE is for selecting the consultant and overseeing the contracts and everything that lives in my team. All right, next slide. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Kate to talk about the first year of the program.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes walking you through the first year of providing direct technical assistance to communities. I will also introduce you to the methodology we used that we developed in order to rank communities based on a number of criteria so that we were confident that each community had an unbiased opportunity to receive a no-cost feasibility study by one of our consultants. Next slide. We had our first community submit a request for technical assistance on May 3rd, 2023. So in less than 1 year, we have had a total of 40 communities request technical assistance through this program. 31 of those communities are still actively working on their projects, and we have 9 that are currently on hold for various reasons. Our projects are spread across the state, serving 18 counties and 5 tribes. And at this point, we have assigned 45 feasibility studies, and 30 of them have been completed. We have 1 remaining study to assign for this state fiscal year. We also have a handful of communities that either did not receive a feasibility study or chose to start with solar, who have worked with solar installers on designing a solar-only system for them for now. Combining all of the 30 completed studies, we have approximately $45 million worth of solar and storage projects. I anticipate that we will have approximately $75 million worth of viable projects by the end of this state fiscal year. And one of the things this program does is help communities find and then apply for funding for their projects. The Washington State Department of Commerce just closed out a renewable energy grant at the beginning of April, and I assisted 17 communities submit 18 applications for a total ask of $12.2 million worth of projects. These grants were a combination of solar and storage installation grants, solar-only grants, and even a few planning and pre-development grants. Next slide, please. In the development of this program, I had a handful of founding principles and goals that needed to be integrated in. Beyond this solar plus storage specific technical assistance program, we have a larger energy resilience technical assistance program that has been developed at the same time. Within that program, we have developed a scalable and repeatable framework that I have used in the implementation of this smaller program. The Washington Energy Resilience Framework stands on 3 pillars. The first is we meet communities where they are. Some communities come with a project in mind and a plan, but many don't. Many come to us knowing they need to do something and they have no idea what to do or where to start. And I will work with them at any level, and most importantly, I do not take credit for the work that they do. Someone wise once told me, big things get done when no one cares who takes the credit. I do believe that this is an important part of our framework. One of the ambitious goals of our work is to start to change the relationship of local governments and nonprofits with state government by building trusted relationships. And this happens a lot easier when we aren't trying to take credit for their work. Number 2, we don't have to agree on the why. There is a real difference between working with larger cities and counties and working with smaller, more remote, and historically under-resourced communities. For example, I'm often surprised to hear someone assume that everyone in Washington state is a blue liberal and all on board the climate change bandwagon. That is certainly not the reality outside of our urban cores. Our smaller communities are filled with people who may think differently. And here at Commerce, we are hiring lots of talented, wonderful people who are committed to combating climate change and making the world healthier and more sustainable for the future. But many of them are going to have a rude awakening when they're working with smaller communities that don't necessarily share those goals. Eyes can glaze over when I'm talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions in some places, and they may not be convinced that climate change is real. But they are experiencing increasing drought and wildfire risk and other challenges, and these events have real impacts that we can have serious conversations about addressing. And finally, our third pillar is we do government differently. So one of the first things I tell communities when I'm introducing myself is that I'm a professionally trained emergency manager. This is an important thing for them to know because the field of emergency management is just a different culture than the normal bureaucracy of state government. I usually just say we're a kooky bunch. It's just a different way of looking at problems and their solutions. I tell them that I'm extremely pragmatic and solutions-based, and that if I have bad news, I'm going to tell them directly, and then we're going to go figure out a plan B, C, D, E, whatever one we're at that point. Because honesty and directness is often received with relief, and I get comments all the time about how I am so different than other state employees that they have worked with in the past. Now, within the Solar Plus Storage Technical Assistance Program, anything the community needs beyond the technical work completed by our contracted experts is my responsibility. I have become the advocate for communities during meetings. I often have to translate the highly technical information shared with them by our consultants. But most importantly, I am the person that they know they can reach out to for questions or assistance. The relationships and trust that we have been able to foster in this program is what I believe has led to its success. In order to get to this place, I had 3 specific goals for our technical assistance program. There has to be a low barrier to enter, or as we call it, this is a no wrong doors experience. One of the hardest things for many communities is just to figure out which program they should apply for. So I tell them that I don't actually care if they ultimately pursue a solar and storage system. Even if they come in the solar and storage door, they may actually need to go to the weatherization door or even a non-energy related program. The last thing they'll hear me say is, sorry, that's not my problem, good luck. Nope, I will find where they need to go and get them there. And if after they still would like some assistance from me, then I'll still be here to help with them with every step of the way during their energy resilience journey. And because we're creating this no wrong doors experience, I needed a lot of expertise behind me. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but I also wonder how many people it takes for a community to achieve their energy resilience goals. Sometimes it only takes one, but oftentimes it takes a whole slew of technical experts and other program experts. I view it as my job to help communities get matched with these entities when they need them. And finally, every community gets a meeting. I needed to humanize this whole process. You can only learn so much about a community through a request assistance form. In my opinion, the only way to even start learning about a community is to meet with them. Let them tell their stories. Let them know that I am a person and that I truly care about their goals. Unfortunately, the bar is so low for government in most people's eyes that even by just answering the phone, I've already surpassed someone's expectations. These communities know who I am and how to reach me. And most importantly, they know that I won't drop them or forget about them. Next slide. We've used a semi-standard process for each community who requests these assistance. The first thing is a community must make a request. This is either through our online request form available on our Solar Plus Storage website or many other ways, like emails or phone calls directly to me. Some came after hearing me speak at a conference, or even others through direct referral from other communities within the program. After that, every community gets a 60-minute virtual meeting. Now, in-person meetings are always allowed, but this is typically done later in the process. But I will say one thing is that the willingness to go to a community and be in the same room with them was immensely appreciated. Yes, it's hard to find time to drive 4 hours each way for a short meeting or a site visit. But when it comes to building trust and truly committing to this work, this is a must. After that, we have a discussion on scope of work and what resilience really means to the community. Now, this is something I always knew I needed to do. However, I've only just now been able to integrate it into the process in a way that I think will work. And I'll cover this more in lessons learned. Now, the feasibility studies are the only true finite resource within this program. We developed a methodology that we use to rank communities in order to try and remove personal bias from the selection process. I will cover this methodology next. Once communities are approved for a no-cost feasibility study, then there's a soft handoff to the consultants. I'm available to the communities and I'm often present in all meetings with the consultants in case I'm needed. I attend any meeting the communities request, I attend. However, my presence is not a requirement. Whatever is most supportive to the community is my priority. And during this whole process, I'm exploring funding opportunities that may suit the individual communities, their needs, and their projects. Once a viable funding opportunity is found, the project is ready for the next step. I assist communities through the whole application process. Now, I won't write a grant for them, and I tell them this in our first meeting. This is because I'm not part of their community, and thus I won't be able to write as good of a grant as they could. However, I help them strategize their answers, find data they may need, proofread their applications as many times as they need me to, and just provide a listening ear when the process gets frustrating. And then at some point, we'll have a closeout, and this is in quotes because to me, the process cannot be defined by arbitrary dates and times like government likes to do. Energy resilience is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Each project and community is unique, and I have committed to them that we will work at the pace that they need in order to feel supported and reach their goals. Each project will close out in its own time, and I don't get a say with that. Next slide. As I've mentioned, we have a limited number of no-cost feasibility studies within this program. One thing we knew from the start is that we didn't want this to be a first-come, first-served program. And because of this, we needed a way to rank communities. But how do you measure community need and capacity in an unbiased way with imperfect data? One thing we do is we meet with the community before we make this determination. The second thing we do is we gather geographic and social data and put them through a formula we developed. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. The first thing we wanted to look at was project location using proximity to other projects. Next slide. Will you go to the next slide? Sorry, this is an old deck. Thank you. In order to spread projects across the state, we rank communities higher when they're not within 20 miles of another project, either another technical assistance project or a project funded through a previous competitive grant. There is more that goes into this, but in consideration of time, I'm not going to go into all of the details about how we look at islands and proximity to projects at different points in the process. But I'm happy to discuss this with anybody who is interested, and my contact will be available on the last slide. Next slide. Next, we wanted to measure vulnerability and risk. We chose to use two different data sets for this. Originally, I was going to use the Washington Environmental Health Disparities data, as this is a state-specific and commonly used to measure burden and vulnerability within the state by other agencies and programs. However, because this data primarily focuses on pollutants and air quality, unless a rural or remote community had heavy agriculture, they were disproportionately ranked low. This would concentrate the high-scoring projects in many of the areas we already had a high number of projects. So I decided to combine this with the CDC AT-SDR developed Social Vulnerability Index, which is a national data set focused on highlighting communities that may need additional support before, during, or after disasters. This decision gave a bit of a boost to rural communities who ranked high on the SDI, but low on the environmental health disparities map. But it also further boosted the communities who ranked high in both and are thus likely the most vulnerable within the state. Next slide, please. Finally, we needed to include capacity. Now, this is only learned during the initial meeting, and this is the main opportunity for bias to enter into the decision. Ultimately, I decide the answer to this part. However, the scoring for this measure is not high enough to guarantee that a low-capacity community receives a no-cost feasibility study. And because of this, I am confident that the bias I bring in does not invalidate the model, and that ultimately the highest need communities will receive this important resource. Now, with regards to tribes, we decided any tribe that requested assistance who had not previously received a no-cost study would automatically receive one. If they were to request for a second one, then their project would be put through the ranking process with all the other non-tribal projects. And this is a necessary step in our efforts to remove barriers to tribes in accessing assistance. When working with data, it is imperative to understand the limitations of how it was gathered and the biases that are inherently present, because ultimately those will dictate the results. Typically, tribes and BIPOC communities are underrepresented in data, and when we use these data sets, it's our responsibility to do what we can to account for this. Next slide. Now we're going to share some of the lessons we have learned in this first year. Next slide, please.
Great, and I will get started with that. So first of all, first lesson learned for us is the challenge of rolling selection. So all of what Kate was saying there, and trying to do a process where we have this ongoing resource that's available, and also we're going to use up all of the resources within the time that we have to use it. That is just a different kind of mode of operating for us, especially when we do competitive grants most of the time. So in the future, I'd probably look at doing clear thresholds or eligibility, and also considering review dates. So we're kind of doing this on a regular basis. The next challenge for me is that compared to competitive grants, this has been cost effective due to the volume of the studies. It's reduced administrative costs and time for everyone. So that includes commerce, the consultants, and the communities, because there's like fewer RFPs and contracts that are going on. And we're also able to ensure quality by bringing in technical resources to select and manage consultants. where communities may not have the expertise to know, what to look for. And then my next lesson is the importance of the wraparound assistance, or basically everything that Kate does. I just didn't know how important this would be when we started. I figured we needed someone to kind of, make sure that they were guiding communities through the process, but it really is essential to help communities through this. And then finally, the lack of funding stability has been an issue for us because our funding does come from the state budget, from the legislature. So the Solar Plus Storage for Resilient Communities program, the budget was cut in our most recent budget about a month ago. And that means we're not going to be able to continue providing the feasibility studies for now, but Kate is still providing the services that she does, and we're kind of supporting our ongoing projects. Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you. So one of my biggest lessons learned was that the program development is always happening. The program today looks very different than the program 9 months ago did. And I was honest from the start with the communities that this was a new program and something that Commerce had never done before. I mean, I would literally say that I was truly building the plane while I was trying to fly it. Each individual project has taught me something new, and one of the biggest things I learned was that I needed to slow the whole thing down. The time between their initial meeting with me and the handoff to the consultants ended up being vital time for the community to become familiar with the system and to really define what resilience meant to them. The majority of communities did not have this defined before the technical work began, and we found that oftentimes large design changes were needed once the community became more familiar with the technological capabilities and its limitations. And I honestly knew this was something that was needed from the very beginning, but I didn't have the knowledge, experience, or time to develop a process for that discussion. I've only just now this month began that work and have started having additional meetings before that handoff, but only through the continuous program development and time will we see if this new effort works. Another huge thing we learned was that the feasibility studies are an immensely valuable resource to these communities. However, some projects could have benefited from a few hours of time with one of our technical experts early on to ensure that the project that was approved for the study was in fact viable and the best project for that community. I will never say that I'm a solar and storage technical expert. That's just not my role in this process. And because of that, I needed to bring someone else in. However, the budget and scope of work for the consultants was set up so that there were X number of full feasibility studies to assign out. And this rigidity was counterintuitive to the individualized process that we had developed. And then you cannot think that communities are the same, even if they look like they are. You may be able to make comparisons and recommendations based on what other similar projects or communities are doing. But honestly, if you've worked with one small community, you've worked with one small community. And you have to go in with an open mind and treat each project, most importantly, each community individually. Now, for me, working with communities was never what I expected to be my job. I'm blunt and honest to a fault, which made me worry that communities would find that off-putting. However, I have found that just by being myself and humanizing the process, communities seem to feel more supported. I always thought that the feasibility studies were the most valuable part of this work, and financially they are. But I'm curious to find out when we do have a closeout process, what the communities actually feel was the most valuable part of this program. The feedback I get the most is appreciation about the softer services and the wraparound services that we built into this program. And most fittingly, in the words of a community that didn't actually receive a feasibility study, but still submitted a grant and found value in this process, they said, "I can't say enough how impressed I have been by you this entire process. I was a federal employee for 40 years. I know what people think and say about their perceptions of civil service, but I also know how hard it can be for dedicated people to be trying to do the right thing with integrity and compassion. both of which you show readily. So truly, the most important thing I've learned is that being authentic really goes a long way in building lasting relationships grounded in trust. Next slide. So thank you so much for giving us the space and the time to share with you about our experience. Jill and I are both available to chat in greater detail on any of this, so please do not hesitate to reach out to either of us.
Thanks, Kate and Jill. That was great. We have a lot of questions for the Q&A in only 15 minutes, so I'm going to go through as many as I can, but I encourage you, feel free to reach out to any of us with your questions. If folks reach out to Anna or I at Clean Energy Group, we'll make sure to forward over Jill and Kate any questions as they come up. So let's get started here. Most of the questions are for both CEG and Washington State, so that's great. I'll start with, in your technical assistance programs, what is the average amount of technical assistance awarded, and how many projects opt for, we'll treat this as a two-parter. Let's start with how much do you typically award? So Clean Energy Group, our typical award is about $7,500. It's a micro fundraising program that covers the cost of an assessment. The solar and storage consultants that we work with oftentimes add reduce their fees because if they're working with a nonprofit program and it's aggregated. So $7,500 got us through for a while there. Recently, we've had to go up to about $9,000. That's on one community facility. If we have community-based organizations that have a particularly complicated project, as is a lot of the time with tribal nations, as well as multiple facilities, like if they're trying to do affordable housing with multiple buildings or a community solar project, we can go up to $15,000, but the average right now is around $9,000. Hand it over to Jill or Kate.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but for the technical assistance program, I think it's around 15,000 per site. And just to be clear, we don't actually provide that funding to the communities. We pay the consultants, so it's the cost of the consultant there, and it does depend on the complexity of the site. So things like larger solar system they might be looking at, different electrical systems, etc.
The consultants also provide some additional services beyond just the technical work. Oftentimes they've helped with grant preparation. One of our consultants had a robust community engagement process, since most grants now require communities to have a meaningful community engagement process or plan within their grant application. So there are some additional services included within that higher cost.
Great. Yeah, and I should clarify as well. The vast majority of our time, the money goes directly to the engineer that they're working with, just out of preference of the community-based organization. We can award it to the community-based organization or provider if that's preferred, but it usually just adds red tape and is not. Another question we have here, I think of solar and storage as a pretty difficult project that doesn't often end up getting implemented. What percentage of projects that receive technical assistance ultimately move forward to solar and storage? So for the Technical Assistance Fund, right now, about 25% of the projects that are funded move forward to solar and storage installation. That number is rapidly going up as more and more folks have access to better incentives and better financing solutions. I would say out of the projects that we've completed, over 90% are solar and storage. There are a couple projects that end up being just solar, but the vast majority work to having the battery storage implemented as well. Anna, I can pass it over to you quick before we give it to Kate or Jill if there's anything you want to add there in project completion.
No, you've absolutely got it. And that statistics, 25% move forward towards project installation. That's leaving out the 50+% that are still working through those barriers, but still really committed to eventually getting it installed. It can take years sometimes, but a lot of folks are still in that project development pipeline.
Yeah, we have projects that are getting completed this week that we've been working on in partnership with them for 4 years. So it's not, especially for smaller community-based organizations, hasn't been a quick process, but hopefully that's changing.
We don't have that data because our program just started less than a year ago. However, just based on the 40 communities that have applied, we only have 9 that have kind of gone on hold for various reasons. And then beyond that, over half of the communities who have active projects have applied for a grant. And I would say probably around 75% of the completed feasibility studies have applied for a grant. We don't know how many of them are successful. I am biased. I think that they're all fantastic and hope they all get funded. But we won't know that until the grant decisions are made in a couple of weeks, months.
And Kate,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jill.
I wanted to add that we don't necessarily see like building a project as the only metric for success. And so we do track that, and it's important, and we want to focus the resources on communities that are going to be able to move forward with a project. But also, we look at, some of the communities, they have very good reasons for not moving forward, and only through the feasibility study process did they realize that this project wasn't the right fit for them. And so in some of those cases, it's that they're looking at different technology. They may be looking at mobile solutions as one example. And so it's okay if communities decide that a different solution is going to meet their goals better.
That actually segues to the next question very well, which is, do your projects for technical assistance focus on stationary solar and storage or solar applications, or is it beyond that? So for Clean Energy Group's Technical Assistance Fund, our priority is solar and battery storage, or battery storage and paired with solar when possible. Increasingly, that has meant portable systems. So we've been working with new engineering partners, new community-based organizations. This is particularly true in Puerto Rico and in other places that are, since we work nationwide, that are disaster-prone, hurricane-prone areas where they need resources in the field, especially to engage with the community, and that has meant portable solar and storage systems. These are oftentimes like trailer-sized systems that can be out in the field for full days to charge laptops, or community cell phone charges has been a huge one, and so they're like moving resilience support for first responders, and in some instances for actually community support. It's a totally different situation, a totally different assessment report, but I think that's increasingly part of this equation.
Yeah, we had 2 projects that received feasibility studies that the mobile option was the better option. One of them was, and they were both for disaster purposes. One is a community that if we have our massive earthquake that we're due for, will be cut off from the grid and from surrounding communities for up to 3 months, if not up to even a year. And the cost of the system was truly imperative. I mean, it was cost prohibitive. And we realized that they could get 11 mobile units that they could dispatch across their county for significantly less than to put in the system that they were thinking they wanted. So they were more interested in the mobile. And then the other was a tribal community who oftentimes has first responders on their reservation, on their lands for wildfire response. And they were wanting to provide power and reliable power during a wildfire response. So kind of similar. Unfortunately, the grants that we have at the state currently don't allow for a mobile option, but it is something that we're exploring, and I keep an eye out for federal grants and nonprofit-based grants that would potentially be able to fund that type of system.
Great, thanks. So in terms of promoting partners' work, how do the technical assistance programs promote community-based partners' efforts to build resilience locally, their successes, their lessons learned? What resources are you developing with them or that are available through your website? So if Kate and Jill, you want to start here, then we can pass it over to Anna to talk about CEG.
So we have not developed a lot of materials internally. We do have some partners, a nonprofit that we work with, that they have some materials about the system. Really, for us, the most important thing is building capacity within the communities and just kind of being available whenever they needed it. And providing that support. And then again, most importantly, never taking credit for their successes, because these are their projects, not ours. And so those have been what we've been able to do within the last year. Now, through the growth and learning of the last year, I've realized that we need to develop or find accessible materials that these communities can use to better familiarize themselves with the systems, and also, more importantly, some of the financial incentives and programs out there. And I haven't had the capacity internally to do a lot of that research, but it's something that I know needs to happen.
Yeah, and for Clean Energy Group, we publish a bunch of resources once folks get their systems installed, featured installs, webinars, co-hosting things, co-publishing things. You can find that on our website under the Technical Assistance Fund tab. And it's really all about uplifting all the hard work, like Kate was saying, that these folks have done to bring resilience to their communities. It's truly tremendous. We just want to uplift all of their work and then also provide resources so that folks earlier on in the process can see how other folks navigated, the barriers and the different stages of development that folks are going through. So these examples are not only a huge round of applause for the folks who made it through, but then also resources for folks who are just learning about solar and battery storage.
All right, I think we have time for a couple more questions. Seth, I'm going to pass this one to you to start. It's a question regarding, we talked a lot about grants supporting the actual development of these projects. How do you see financing developing nationwide to support projects outside of grant applications? Is solar and storage a realistic economic situation for all, or is it dependent on the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not an easy one to answer. Clean Energy Group years ago with Kresge Foundation and New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation set up a fine solar and storage program. It took several years actually to deploy those funds. There's a lot of unknowns still. A lot of financial institutions are hesitant because of the risks involved in energy storage. Most of the funding streams out there, it'd be great if we could all monetize resilience and finance that. That has been tricky, to say the least. So, I think that there are going to be some big opportunities, though, through the federal programs that are out there. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund provides a lot of new financing opportunities for solar and energy storage as well. So we will all be watching that space, and Clean Energy Group's involved in some of that, but there's going to be so many opportunities, I think, that are new opportunities available through that, I think in the coming years, we're going to see a lot more opportunities. I would love to see, Jill or Kate, if you guys, what you're seeing on the financing side.
Yeah, I think funding has been a big challenge for a lot of these communities, and we actually, in the first iteration of the grant, had a 30% match requirement in the hopes of monetizing tax credits. We didn't require anyone to take that tax credit, but we were hoping that they would be able to get the tax credit, and through the direct pay in particular, because these are primarily nonprofits and government buildings. But we realized that so many communities just cannot make that happen because of the need to carry those costs until they actually get the tax credit. And I guess initially we had hoped that it would be a shorter time period as well, but ended up being longer. And so we reduced the match requirement for our grant program. That actually eliminated it in the most recent round. And so that is we're hoping will help more people access the funding, but is also a bit of a bummer in terms of not being able to leverage that potential federal funding through the tax credits. And so then we're looking at what are the financing options, and at the moment there's not a lot out there for these communities in particular, these types of organizations in particular. But I do see that more of that is developing, as some of the funding from the IRA does come out. And within Washington, we also recently got state funding for kind of startup costs for a green bank. So that's exciting that that's going to be coming. But I think many of these things will be happening in a few years, right? And we also got a Solar for All award, which we're very excited about. So that will be coming as well. But again, not quite yet, in a few years, or in a year when we're done with that program development design for the first year. And so, yeah, it's kind of an ongoing opportunity. Oh, and we also have one of our utilities in Washington is working with many of these grantees to potentially provide them payments for a demand response pilot. So that's another thing that's beginning to develop, but we don't have a very robust incentive structure for that at this point.
Yeah, and just a shout out to the Green Bank structure. I think some of the more success that we have seen with financing is when the Green Bank has strong programs like what we're working on with Connecticut Green Bank in terms of really having a team that's flexible and innovative and saying, oh, this is an obstacle to finance. How do we meet that obstacle? So it'll be exciting to see as more green banks develop financing opportunities, how that helps with market development in these communities. So we have hit 2:30. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This will be recorded. We'll share it around. And please, keep in the know for the other celebrating 10 years of TAF materials that we have coming out. Thank you so much, Jill and Kate, for participating. This has been super informative. I didn't get to a bunch of questions, so please feel free to email me and I will make sure that it goes to the right panelists. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.